Hello, my creative friends, and welcome to another episode of The Daily Prompt. This is the series where I'm going to build an independent film studio, and I'm going to take you along for the ride. And every day, I'm going to give you some sort of daily prompt, some daily action prompt to encourage you to actually follow through on whatever that idea is in your head or that dream in your soul so that you can keep moving forward toward your progress. Now, what we've started doing over the past couple of days is I'm reverse engineering the complete process. So in episode number 4, I gave you sort of an overview of the complete process. And then starting yesterday, we're going through each of those 7 phases. And then at the end, I'm going to sort of tie it all together and give you some sort of bigger picture ideas and perspective from it. So yesterday we talked about the end goal, which is how do you sell your screenplay? How do you actually then connect with that producer? And obviously, you know, that it's going to be different for every writer. This is one of the great challenges that I think newer writers maybe don't fully understand or appreciate. There is no one single way to get there. So all I can really do is talk about sort of the process and the ideas, sort of the principles involved. Now, one of the great challenges that you have is obviously, you're not going to be able to sell your work. You're not going to be able to connect with a producer unless the project that you create is perfectly aligned with a producer's immediate needs. So how do you know if your project is aligned with a producer's needs, or how do you get it aligned with a producer's needs? And that's pretty much what we're going to talk about today. One of my biggest discoveries in the screenwriting world is something that I believe that I discovered. I mean, other people knew it, sort of, everyone knows it intuitively, but I think I was the first to sort of identify it. And the only way that I did that was that I tried to reverse engineer this process to help writers go through it, and in doing so, realize what I think is the missing ingredient, the main problem with pretty much all material that doesn't connect and doesn't find a producer. And that is this idea called alignment. See, I can help a writer go through the process. I can help them turn their idea into a screenplay, make sure that's solid, make sure it's a page turner. But at the end, if you end up with something that's a great production-ready page turner screenplay, and it isn't actually aligned with any producer, it doesn't really matter how good that project is. So to my way of thinking, once this sort of light bulb clicked over my head, light bulbs don't click, but you understand what I'm saying. It sort of dawned on me that this aspect of the whole thing, what I realized is that alignment is actually a skill. It's a skill that professional screenwriters have, that they develop on the job or intuitively or just through meetings that they take. Alignment is a skill that every screenwriter actually has to have. Now, you don't necessarily need the skill of alignment if you're writing a novel or if you're writing other story forms, but one of the key principal unique aspects of screenwriting is that you're not just writing the document itself, you're writing the blueprint for the production of the film. So as a result, you're not really just a writer creating a piece of written material, creating a story. You're actually part of the film team, part of the production process, and you're the one that's created the document that everyone else is going to use and inspire their creativity and go make the film with. So alignment is actually an enormously important and beneficial and powerful skill. And it's something that I've never seen taught anywhere else before I started teaching it 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And the only reason I try to stake claim to that is because I think it's really important to understand the perspective of it. I think it's important to understand how it comes about. I realize that I can help writers write screenplays, but if at the end of the day, I don't want to make that screenplay, or I can't make that screenplay, even though it's good and it's solid and it ticks off all the boxes, well, there's that bridge that we have to cross. See, I didn't get into this to teach people how to write screenplays. I got into this to actually develop material. And if you actually want to develop material, if you actually want to go produce stuff and make films, not just sort of make fine deals for the people for your students, but actually go make films, you need to make sure that what's being generated is something that's right for you. Now, as a teacher, I can't go just only teach writers how to write what I want to make, because that's not really ethical and that's not really fair to the writer. I need to teach you how to write what you want to make that's in sync with the producer you want to connect with. the skill of alignment and being able to align is actually a huge part of that process, whether you're trying to connect with me or whether you're trying to connect with anyone. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. The point that we have to get to is that when you complete your screenplay, the only way you're going to get a yes from anyone is if that person is interested in it, likes it, believes they can make it, and it's not as bad as it sounds, and wants to make it right now. Does it make sense? So how do we ensure alignment? I'm very, very, very much against writing for a producer. I'm very, very much against writing for the market because you think horror films are hot right now. I'm going to go write a horror film. No, if you're passionate about horror films, if you love them, write them. Don't write something because you think there's a market for it, because if it takes 2 to 3 years to get the sale, then ultimately you might not be aligned with that anymore, and you might have a great horror script and nobody's buying them anymore. So make sense? If you have if you try to write for a producer, if you're watching the show and you're liking my energy and you're liking what I'm putting out there, and you think, hey, it'd be great to work with him, I don't necessarily want that. I don't want you to write for me ever. I want you to write for you. And hopefully, possibly, someone out there will be aligned with what I want to make. Okay, so what is alignment? How do you get it? How do you develop this skill, if indeed it is a skill? Well, here's how you develop the skill of alignment. You send the work that you have already written out into the world for feedback and notes. And then the notes and feedback that you get, you don't get upset about them. You don't get pissed off that people don't like your script or can't see the genius in your dialogue or your characters or your storytelling prowess. What you do is you look to see what the notes are telling you. You interpret, you identify what common threads there are for the different notes that you get. You interpret what they're actually saying. A lot of people who give notes are really bad at giving notes. They can tell you that something's not working, but they can't tell you why it's not working. They can tell you that something isn't, that they don't like this character, but they don't necessarily know why they don't like this character. Or worse, they tell you exactly why they don't like that character, but that's not really the reason they don't like that character. Maybe you set something up wrong before, and so by the time they saw this scene that they think they don't like, they already had the wrong idea of that character. So what you need to do is change the thing earlier in the process that changes that enables them to like the character. Now, so to understand the skill of alignment, what you need to do is you need to send your work out for notes and for feedback, to get and gather that feedback, to interpret it, to decipher it, to figure out what it's really saying. And then you'll start to understand how your script lands with the reader, the way, and whether that's the way you want it to land or not. One of the biggest things that I think writers misunderstand is that you think you're taking your story and you're putting it out there. You think it's a one-way communication, and it's not. It's a two-way experience. The reader, or the viewer ultimately in the movie theater, they're having an interactive experience with the story, whether you know it, whether you like it or not. They're interacting with the story because their mind is going ahead in the story. Their mind is taking them on imaginary sidetracks on the journey. Their mind is engaging with the experience. And because our minds are always active, think about it. You can drive down the street, you're thinking about 10 different things. Our minds are always active. So even when they're engaging with the specifics of your story, they're also thinking about other things. One of the things they're thinking about is, how is this story going to play out? How is this going to land? You need to understand as a writer how your work lands with the reader. So notes and feedback are the way to do that. Notes and feedback are the way to understand how they're interpreting and how your work is landing in their minds. So for example, let's say you write a comedy and people send it back and say, that's a really dark story. And you're going, wait, it's a comedy, right? And they go, oh, it was a comedy? I didn't even realize, because there was nothing funny in it, right? Or they didn't see the jokes. So if they didn't see the jokes, then your setups and your payoffs or your turn of phrase or the way a scene plays out isn't landing with them the way you want it to land, the way you're intending for it to land. So you need that feedback. Yeah, you could get a bruised ego and go, oh, geez, nobody likes my writing. I'm not funny after all. I got to give it up and go, do my day job again. At the end of the day, don't give it up. Understand, decipher what they're saying and what they're getting out of your story. If you can understand that, you identify what that is, then you basically use that to reshape the writing to make sure that the story that you write lands with the reader the way you intend for it to land with the reader. Look, I'm not telling anyone to write for the audience. I'm not telling anyone to change their writing because the audience doesn't like this character or that choice or this story element. Maybe so. That's a judgment call for the writer. The writer, it's not about appeasing anyone. It's not about adapting anything for someone else. It's about understanding how what you write impacts upon the reader. If you can understand that and you see that it's actually landing over here, they're imagining a different story. And so because they imagined this other story, the choices that you make in your story were deflating to them. They were not as interesting. They were not as good or as compelling because they had a better story in their imagination. This is the writer's biggest single challenge, I would say. I have this saying that I came up with years and years ago. Every word you write makes a promise. It either makes or implies a promise. And your whole story, everything that comes after that, has to either keep that promise, exceed that promise, or it will break that promise. So let's imagine I say a love story of two kids at an amusement park. First love, right? First of all, you have right now in your head a general age range for these characters. And I haven't told you anything about that. So if you don't know, if I don't give you any more information and you're imagining some teenagers, well, that's going to be a very different story than if I pull out some, two 10-year-olds, right? It's a very different story. First love at 10 is very different to first love at 16, right? So the point is, every word you write makes or implies a promise. And so when the reader reads that or the audience watches that on the screen, their mind is going to create story. Their mind is going to go ahead and see where they think your story is taking them. And if your story does not take them where they wanted to go or is not as good as what they came up with themselves, they're going to be disappointed. If they're disappointed, your story is not going to land. If your story doesn't land, it's not going to sell. So the importance of getting notes and feedback cannot be overstated. I cannot tell you how many times people have submitted material to me over the years that has clearly not been read by another set of human eyes. I should not be the first person reading anyone's screenplay at any point, except the people maybe that I'm developing the productions with and in the writer's room. So the takeaway here is once you understand how to get notes and feedback, once you understand how to send your work out, how to interpret and decipher what the notes are actually saying, if you have conflicting notes, what they might all be sharing in common and what they might be pointing to, and how to go into your story and actually move things around so that it satisfies the notes or even takes it one step further. That is the skill of alignment. And here's why that's important. For screenwriting in particular, if you're writing for production, let's say you've written an amazing final scene in the movie, and for whatever reason, we tried to shoot it earlier in the shoot, but we just couldn't get it shot. And so now it's the final day of production, and we're spending lots and lots of money, and it's supposed to be this beautiful shot, sunset, the beach, the two people coming together at the end and embracing, and we fade out at the end, right? Cheesy, whatever. But anyway, let's imagine that was the big thing. And then on the day of production, we get there, and it's raining. We can't use the location because there's a giant crane sitting on the beach for some public works project or something. what do we do at this point? So you as the writer, as a screenwriter, if you're involved in the production, which that's largely going to be dependent on you, if you're involved in the production, we're going to come to you and we're going to say, we need a final scene that does everything this final scene did, and presumably there's all sorts of symbolism and metaphor and blah, blah, blah in the scene that you wrote, which we now cannot shoot. We come to you and we say, we need something to replace it that we can shoot now, and here's our limited parameters. Can you pull that out? Can you make that happen? Now, that's probably not going to happen on a big budget Hollywood film, but it certainly may happen on a little indie film. And so that the skill of alignment applies in the production world that way, right? So if you can get good at sending your work out for notes and feedback and being able to interpret and decipher and understand all that stuff, and then take all that and adapt your work so that it lands with the reader the way you want it to land with the reader based upon what they gave you, right? If you can do that, that skill is transferable to the actual production side of things. So suddenly you as a writer become a more viable person. So let's imagine you reach out to a producer, a production company, and that you give them the script, which we know after all this notes and feedback, and you've adjusted and tweaked and adapted so it lands the way that you want it to land. Now, let's say you get into the hands of a producer and they go, wow, I love this thing. And it's a story with a hero who's, you know, a guy in his mid-30s, right? And they go, this is fantastic. I have access to, name a female star in her early 40s, for example. And you go, I have access to this A-list star over here. You think we could change this story so that it can work for her? If you can do that, you have alignment, you have a deal, right? So having the skill, the ability to do that, you say, well, this is written for a guy. The whole thing is all built. Can you go back and change that into something written for a different character? So do you want to, first of all? Now, we're not talking about whether you should do this or not. That's a personal choice. That's going to be different for everyone. But can you do that is really the test of a professional level screenwriter or not. First of all, have you been able to write something at that level? Secondly, are you able to align that to the needs of a producer or a production company at that point? So if you have that skill, if you're able to do that, then the deal happens and you can move forward. If you're not, then it doesn't happen. If you don't actually take the time to understand what notes and feedback are, to understand how to use and interpret and adapt to them, then this whole skill set is going to be lost. I find that most writers don't get enough notes and feedback, and so that all they're thinking about is putting their idea out there. They're not thinking about the relationship with the reader. If you don't do that, if you don't develop this skill, ultimately I think it makes it more or less impossible to connect with someone. If you do develop the skill, you can actually take this skill and infuse it into your creative process. Once you start thinking this way, once you start understanding that this is a dialogue, that no feedback is bad feedback. All feedback can help you see how to improve your project. It's not about adapting for them. It's about understanding how your project lands. So let's say people don't like a certain character or a certain scene or whatever. If you're happy with that, if that still ultimately leads to what you're trying to say or the story you're trying to tell, then okay, well, they don't like that person. Can you make it so that it's a visceral hatred, or if it's something that they love to hate, that kind of a thing? Ultimately, these are the nuances that are going to separate the amateurs from the professionals. Now, if you talk to any professional screenwriter who's been around, who's had a film made, who's been in the industry for any length of time, they will have been on a set. They will have had to adapt their work. They will have gotten script notes from studio heads and from producers and from directors that completely conflict with one another, that are going in three different directions. It's the writer's job to figure out how to align those, if possible, or which way to go with them. So So this skill, in my opinion, is a key skill. And as I see it, it's fundamentally part of this process. So as we look to the idea of reverse engineering this process, the very end is to sell your screenplay. Well, that's what everybody wants to jump to first. But do you have that skill of alignment first? Because if you do, you're going to be much more likely to be able to find and connect with producers. If you don't, it's going to be very, very hard to do that. So how do you develop that skill? You got to send your work out for notes and feedback, which means we have to actually have a project to send out for notes and feedback. So as we continue tomorrow, I'm going to take you sort of to the end of that writing process and figure out how to make sure that when you send your work out to other people, that it is actually something extraordinary that's going to make them eager to read your work. So, by the way, this is not nearly as bad as it sounds. It's just that when I talk, it coughs. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions or comments about any of this stuff, please pop them into the comments below. I'm reading everything. I don't know if you're going back and reading comments of other episodes, but like I'm going into detail and answers and stuff on the comments. So spend a little time in the comments section and you'll see that there's more of a dialogue for us to have as well. But please be sure to leave a comment, leave a question, whatever. Today's daily prompt, to sort of pull it back to you, is ask yourself, have you ever actually sent your work out for notes and feedback? And if you have, how many people did you send your one project off to? Now, I'm not also talking about script reads and all that kind of stuff. That is part of the alignment process, doing table reads and that kind of thing. But you have to really understand how to do a table read. So it's a little beyond the scope of just this video right here. We might dig into that a little bit later. But what I want you to think about is how many people have actually read the work that you've written and what kind of feedback have you gotten on it? Because if you've gotten no feedback on anything you've ever written, you're not really getting a sense of the communication aspect of your writing. So what you should do, if you can, depending on where you are in the process, as it prompts today, is send something you've written to someone. Get some feedback on something you've written so that when you get that feedback back, you can look at it and try to understand, how would I go about changing what I've written to either satisfy that or to make what I was trying to make clearer to them so that they had a different reaction to my work. Make sense? If you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much for commenting. It really does mean the world to me. And those of you that are reaching out through direct message and all that on Instagram and Twitter, I appreciate that very, very much. I'm super excited. I think we're going to be able to build all this. And it's very, very exciting. So anyway, thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.